Welcome to the Deep Leadership Podcast. Today I'm joined by Brian Slade. Brian has held command positions in the Army and the Air Force and has received the Distinguished Flying Cross, Bronze Star, and 14 Combat Air Medals. He currently serves as Lieutenant Colonel for Air Force Combat Search and Rescue, and he is the author of a new book called Cleared Hot: Lessons Learned About Life, Love, and Leadership While Flying the Apache Gunship in Afghanistan, and Why I Believe a Prepared Mind Can Help Minimize PTSD. Brian joins us to talk about how to prepare our minds to help us fight and find success in whatever we do. So, Brian, welcome to the show.
Thanks, John. Thanks for that intro. I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, it is an honor to meet you, and it's an honor to hear your story and be on the podcast and have the listeners hear from you, because I think you've had a remarkable military career, and we'd love to hear about it and the lessons that you learned. So let's just let's talk about your story. How did you end up in Afghanistan, and what did you do there?
How'd I end up in Afghanistan? Well, that's like a loaded question, right?
Yes.
I raised my hand to the square and said yes. Basically, I enlisted in 1997, 1997, and didn't really deploy to Afghanistan until 2007 or 2006, 2007. And 9/11 happened in between there, obviously. And after 9/11 happened, it was me chasing units to try to get deployed to Afghanistan. And once I finished Apache school, I actually did it at a location there, co-located with a unit in Tucson, Arizona, that was on the docket to go deploy. And so I reached out to them and said, hey, if you'll make me a platoon leader in one of your line companies, i.e., I want to fly, not be an admin weenie while we're gone, then I'll gladly come with you guys. And they took me up on that offer, and lo and behold, that's what happened. I ended up in Afghanistan. I actually ended up first boots on the ground for our unit in Afghanistan, because I was the unit movement officer for our company and was on the Advon party. And so my first step into theater was without my team, which was interesting.
Wow. What was the situation like there? What was your mission, and how much of it was eye-opening to you? Because it's one thing to train in the military, but it's another thing to be placed in a combat zone.
That's a really good question, and honestly goes right into what I was starting to say. Is when I got there, I didn't know what to expect. Right. I hadn't been there before. And as I was deploying as part of a guard unit, neither had anybody that we were going with. So there wasn't a lot of those guys that I could be like, hey, what's it going to be like? What's this? What can I expect? And it was during a time when the news was all Iraq, 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 Iraq. You just didn't hear Afghanistan. And honestly, we thought we were getting kind of like the JV tournament, because we hadn't heard about Afghanistan. We didn't think much was going on, and we were wrong. But we didn't know, and so when we landed, me and two of the sergeants that I traveled with, maintainers, it was early morning, and we landed in Bagram, Afghanistan, and in the back of that clamshell, the C-17 with three of our Apache helicopters, it opened up, and it was kind of like in a movie where it was dark, and then it started to be bright light. You couldn't really see anything because your eyes were starting to adjust, and you're waiting to see what there is. And first thing that hit me was the smell, and I was like, man, that doesn't smell that bad. It smells kind of good. And I just, I kind of expected, it's a war, it's going to stink or something, and I went back to Afghanistan a couple of times. If I would have went to Kandahar, it would have stunk, but I was in Bagram, and it actually smelled pretty good. And my second surprise is, as that door continued to descend, I saw what looked like the Rocky Mountains, beautiful snow-capped mountains. And I was like, whoa, this isn't what I expected at all, and it was one of those lessons on beauty in the midst of ugliness, and that's one of those things that I learned through the tour, is to keep that mindset, that the beauty is permanent and the ugliness is temporary.
How long were you there?
I was there on this deployment for just over a year. Just over a year. We had actually, it was a 23-month deployment total, because a guard unit, we were Alpha Model Apache qualified. We had to get unit field training certified in the Longbow helicopter, and that was a little over an 8-month deployment in Fort Hood, Texas, and it was all back to back. So, honestly, I didn't like the Texas part more than I didn't like the theater part, because you were in the U.S. and you still couldn't see your family. It was kind of a long stint without seeing people.
Yeah, absolutely. And when did you start flying in combat missions?
So we got there, and pretty much right off the bat, within a week we were flying. And at first it was just ring routes. And a ring route is, for those that don't know what that means, is like supply route, where we're bringing, the forward operating bases, food, mail, all those kind of things. We're not the ones carrying it. We're actually escorting the Black Hawks and the Chinooks, that are the utility helicopters that are supplying that stuff. And we're just there to, bring the, Teddy Roosevelt, speak softly but carry a big stick. We were the big stick, so to deter any kind of interaction with utility helicopters. And that's what we started out doing. And when we pulled out, took off at first, my head swiveling around. I was all anxious because I hadn't been there before, and I was really trying to look for Johnny Taliban, and actually rubbed my neck raw on my load bearing vest, just because I have, like, that full back type neck. And once again, I was just looking at the landscape and, like, man, I just couldn't get over how pretty it was with the snow and everything. And then finally we did get called into what's called the troops in contact, or a TIC, to support the ground elements who were under fire, and in an effective way, by the Taliban. And it was an interesting contrast for me, because we were up there in the beauty, looking at the mountains and the majesty. And like I said, that's something that's permanent. It's always there. It's not going anywhere. But then we just get called into the gunfight. As we get called into the gunfight, the whole field changes. You got the guy on the radio who's noticeably under duress. You can hear gunfire in the background. He says he's taking effective fire, needs immediate suppression. Ask for that from us, because that's what we do. And of course, we're like, yep, that's what we're going to do. We'll take care of this. So as we roll in, we become focused on that gunfight. We become focused on what I would call the finite actions, the things that seem overwhelming and seem permanent in the moment, because you're so focused on them. It's the wedge of the piece of the pie, that only piece you can see at that moment, because it is your 50-meter target. It is your front sight post. It's what you're focused on right then. And the interesting part to me is, while we're doing that, and we were engaging the enemy and they were engaging us, and then, there's some adrenaline and some infusion of intensity in there. Those mountains, with their majesty and all that beauty, never went anywhere, right? They were still there. They were still in the background. They were still the infinite, while we were focused on the finite, thinking and treating it as if it was the infinite. And that is the metaphor that I like to use with a lot of these guys, that a lot of things that happen. A lot of times when people feel there's no way out, people feel they're in too deep, or they feel they're just overwhelmed, it's because they're focused on that front sight post. They're focused on that gunfight, and they forgot that the mountains are still there, right? They're not remembering that the infinite is still there. And I'm bringing one more step, or two more steps. If you raise up and you get even higher, and you start to see the curvature of the earth, I don't care if we're over the ugliest place on the planet. And I say this in most of my podcasts, because I really like this analogy, and I think it brings home the importance and understanding of what the big picture is. I don't care if you're over the ugliest place on the planet, it's majestic and beautiful. And then if you go into space, which and when you're at the curvature of the earth, it's majestic and beautiful in every direction, right? Every direction. You raise up into space and you see the globe, this celestial body that we call a planet, with the clouds over it, and the contrast of the blues and the browns and the greens. That's just got to be awe-inspiring. And the crazy part about that is that beauty is not in every direction, because there is no direction. It just is. It just is. And that's the truth of infinite. It's not a thing that's in a direction or has a limit or whatever. It is infinite, and it just is. And you look at that beautiful planet, and how many gunfights are happening on that planet at any given. How many gunfights are happening right now? Real, metaphorical, or otherwise? And how many people have been hoodwinked into thinking that is the infinite? How many people have been fooled to believe that there is no way out of that? And that's where you get the helplessness, and that's where you get the things that we're trying to fight against, is people getting to that ultimate decision of, maybe even taking their own life, right? So that's a long way to answer that question, but that was
No, but
really
it leads
impactful.
into, yeah, I think it leads into what I want to talk about, which is your book. The book is called Cleared Hot. Tell us why, tell us about the book and why you wrote it, and what are you hoping to achieve with this book?
Well, first of all, cleared hot, for those that aren't military, means that you've met all the directives to engage with lethal force or ordnance, right? And I chose that title purposefully because the intent of the book is to teach through military lessons, applications in everyday life, no matter who you are, to enable you to understand that you have the authority to be cleared hot on your life, right? You have the authority to engage with purpose and decisiveness on your life. Don't let that crap hold you back, man. And so, really, the reason I wrote the book was I had all kinds of crazy experiences. I was, you mentioned the video that you watched and listened to. That was one of them, but there's lots while I was there, right? And gunfights and getting shot up and having to do emergency procedures and landing and just, not kissing the ground, but pretty close to kissing the ground. I'm just being grateful that I'm on the side I'm on, and that I was allocated the resources I was allocated, and that was with the team I was with, and all those things. But because of those experiences, there was a lot of lessons I learned from them. And when I looked around at my peers as time passed on and marched on, I realized that we were all exposed to similar situations, but it affected us all differently.
Mm.
Right? There were those that actually grew from the experiences, and they became foundational pieces and better versions of themselves. I would put myself in that category. I'm not saying that I didn't have any negative impacts based off of the experiences had, but overall, it was growth oriented. Overall, I saw that it happened for me, not to me.
Mm.
And when I started to look around, that was not universally the story. And in fact, some people were buried and bogged down in that gunfight. Some people, that's all they were seeing. And it wasn't a thing in their past that was foundational. It was in their present and an obstacle, right? And that started me thinking. I'm like, how can we have so many people experience very similar things, but such a different array or spectrum of reaction? And so I really started to get together with some people, psychologists, professionals, mental health people, and dissect that. And they did, to do that. They dug into what I was doing. They're like, well, let's see where let's use you as the test, the science test, but whatever you want to call it, the petri dish,
Mm.
if you will. And
Well, we would call that you're a positive deviant. In other words, you went through the same trauma, but came out with with growth, right? So sometimes that's called a positive deviant. So I would say, yeah, we'd like to figure out why, if I were studying and writing a book on this, I'd like to know why you came out that way.
yeah, I'm not sure how to feel about you calling me a deviant, but okay, we'll roll with that
A
positive
positive
deviant thing.
deviant.
Yeah, so really what we boiled down to, there was some things, that they broke into, like my childhood, my growing up, my day-to-day rituals while I was deployed, before I was deployed, and after I was deployed. And we were able to find certain things that were teachable, like that we could teach to people to prepare or repair as the case may dictate. Um, there was also things that are not teachable, right? I can't control what kind of abuse or what kind of trauma you were previously exposed to as a child. I can control. We can't teach the strength that is fostered by having a nuclear family. We can't teach that you either do or you don't have those things. And I believe all of us come to this world with our own little set of who we are, that 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 it is our wiring, and some wiring is more predisposed to digest those type of experiences in a way that is beneficial, while others is more predisposed to to actually be damaged by it. Doesn't mean that that damage can't be turned into a strength, though. And so what we started to distill was the things that were teachable, the things that I was doing that you could teach to anybody. And there was like 7 different techniques that, I mean, not techniques, but principles that there were more, but those were what we really kind of focused on in the book. And from there, we do have a training that we've developed that is trying to help people to employ those in their life, right? To where you can experience growth from trauma. Because here's one thing that we all know, and I think nobody's going to argue with me: trauma is powerful, right? Trauma is powerful because it has the power to keep people in that gunfight and even ultimately take their lives at times, or turn you into a superhero. It's a lightning bolt. I use this analogy because a lightning bolt can kill you with one hit, or it can light a city. And it's all a matter of how you use that power. It's all a matter of how you see that power, how you receive that power, right? And all of us aren't set up to receive it the right way yet, and that's why I don't say any. My brothers and sisters in arms that come back and people call them broken, I say, nope, you're not broken. You're not broken. You've actually been given a gift that we just got to teach you how to utilize that, harness that power. You experienced ugly, and right now you're keeping that ugly inside of you, but you can be in the ugly, but not have the ugly operate in you. Right? And once you can definitively draw an outline that barriers you between those two things and know that you experienced it, and that experience can be drawn upon and put as a foundational piece rather than a defining piece in your present, right? If that is not, you are not that incident. You experienced that incident. Even if you were participating, it's still the experience. So trauma is powerful, and it's all about harnessing that power. It's all about digesting it, accepting it, and putting it where it needs to be, and that's under your feet.
So I imagine that, there's a lot of veterans who can appreciate this book. Is this book also, written such that people who've experienced trauma, even though they weren't in the military, they're going to gain something out of this book?
Absolutely. That's what, I didn't say military trauma, right? I did that on purpose. Trauma is trauma. Pain is pain. Dealing and coping is dealing and coping. Perspective is perspective. These are all universal. They have nothing to do with where you acquired your trauma. And I call it trauma envy sometimes. Like, people are like, well, I've never experienced anything like your trauma. Well, I don't know. Because here's the deal. In my book, I talk about some pretty harrowing, heinous situations where we're blowing up people and they're trying to blow us up, and sometimes they're blowing up our people. And that's all, the type of stuff that people are like, ooh, they do this. But I was also in a very caustic relationship with a woman who had a mental disorder, borderline personality disorder, while I was gone. And in many ways, I experienced much more trauma from interacting and trying to interact with that relationship than I did from trying to navigate the dynamics of Taliban and engaging with lethal force against that enemy. And a relationship is something that I think a lot of people can relate to, right? And a lot of people have experienced trauma through relationships. Often that is where it comes from. And I'm here to say I've experienced some of these things that people would put in whatever you want to call it, the class A trauma or whatever, when I call trauma envy. But if you're part of it, when I say why I believe a prepared mind can benefit you with PTSD, is that my mind was prepared pretty well for that kind of trauma, for the war trauma. And I came out of it growing from it. Now, my mind was not prepared for the intricacies of a difficult relationship to a woman who had mental illness. I didn't have preparation for that. I didn't chair fly that, which is one of the principles that we teach, is chair flying. I didn't do those things for that. So it impacted me negatively. I had to actually repair from that, where I was prepared for the other.
Okay. How does, as people are listening into this and they've experienced some trauma and they're still has lingering effects on their confidence, their focus, their what they want to do in life. They just can't seem to get over that issue. They've already experienced the trauma. What are some next steps, or where should they be? Where do they start? I guess is the tough part.
We call that being stuck,
Yeah,
right?
that's right. Yeah.
Yeah, we call that being stuck. And I'll be, we do have a training that we're putting together that teaches people how to get unstuck. And it's a lot more, I will say this, it's simply complicated.
Yes, I imagine.
Right? At the end of the day, it's simple. You're the ones getting yourself stuck. You're the one holding you in that mire.
Yeah.
But how, if it's that simple, then how do I mean, that's good news, bad news, right? The good news is if you're the one holding you there, you're the one that can let yourself get out. You're the one that can get
Yeah.
yourself out. Nobody else is holding you there,
Yeah.
right? But the bad news is if you're the one holding you there, you haven't figured it out yet, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And you're like, well, wait a minute. If I'm the one keeping me stuck, that can't be, because I would just not let myself be stuck. And without going into too much into the process, because that's a whole course worth of getting people through. But really, it's just accepting that experience, and that there are no coincidences. Everything that happens for you, not to you.
Mm.
We say this all the time. So and so came up through the rough knocks, and this happened to him, and that happened to him, and this happened to him, and despite all odds, they became this amazing person.
Mm. Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
and I say nope. Uh-uh.
Mm.
Because of all odds,
Yeah.
they
Yeah.
became that person, right? That stuff happened for them. Obstacles, trials, all those things are just cleverly disguised opportunities, but we have to see them for that. We have to see what came from or could come from that those obstacles and trials. Recognize and accept the experience.
It's interesting because I've not experienced combat like you have, but I've been through some hard times in my days in the military, and one of the things I've always felt like is those difficult situations, months at sea, like in one case, winter in the North Atlantic, just rough seas for weeks on end. But when you go through those really difficult moments, in my mind at least, or at least in my experience, is that it's like a new high water mark for you. Like, well, if I've got through that, I can get through anything, or I can get through things that are difficult. I've been through something very difficult, and it's almost like for me at least, it gives me confidence I can withstand difficulties in the future. And it certainly, as an entrepreneur, starting a company has been difficult, but nothing compared to some of the things I went through in the military. So to me, it's never been difficult because I've been hardened, over some of these tough situations. Is it similar that way when you say these things are done for you and not to you?
Well, I think you hit the nail on the head. You're talking about difficult things that you've done in the past, and you're looking back at them and realizing that you gained a perspective by
Mm.
getting through that. You gained a perspective that helped you move forward with other endeavors. You may have engaged. I always say you engage in something and you get through it, and that if you look backwards, it's easy to see the gains. It's easy to see that most of the biggest gains, the biggest growth, all came from some of the hardest things that you've ever done, whether they were self initiated or if it was just circumstantial. You get through it. On the backside, you almost always have your biggest gains, right? Sometimes those gains are self-imposed, like goals, right? A goal is just an obstacle that we put in our as a self-imposed obstacle, but you set a goal, you reach your goal, and then you look back, you had the biggest growth. We can see that looking backwards pretty clearly, but what we fail to do is when we see it looking forward or in the present. And I always tell people, I'm like, look back, start counting those gains, start counting those wins and see where they came. And then the next time you're sitting there and you're like, man, this is tough. You're starting a new business, like you're saying, holy crap, this is tough. you can start to relish that opportunity. You're like, the tougher this is, that means the bigger this is going to be a lesson. At least at a minimum, this is going to be a lesson learned. At a maximum, this is going to be a phenomenal experience and growth, right? So once you can bring that perspective into the present and into the future from the lessons learned by the perspective gained by looking at their gains in the past, and once you create a habit of doing that, man, whenever something bad's happening, you relish it. Embrace the suck, right? We talk about that in the military, right?
Yeah, yeah.
They always said that, but I never really saw it this way, right? Like I was like, yeah, embrace the suck, because don't seek it out necessarily, but when you're in it, understand that's a growth opportunity.
Yeah.
That's happening for you.
It's interesting. I mean, maybe this is a silly analogy, but this morning I have a weight room, in my house, and it's leg day on Tuesdays, and I do, and I get my leg day in, right, and it hurts, and you feel the pain over the several days afterwards, and the common thing with weightlifters is don't skip leg day, right, and the reason why you don't skip leg day is because that's where you get your gains, but you got to go through the pain to get the growth, and I think that some of what you're saying is that we develop strength as we go through have these experiences, as long as we have the right mindset going into it.
Right. And then you can use that analogy with weight training, applies to so many places. It just, even in the fact that of what I just said, yeah, that perspective, taking the perspective from looking backwards and playing it forward, that sounds easy. You have to practice it. You have to stretch that muscle. You have to stretch it, practice it until it becomes easy. When you're squatting one plate and it's really, really hard, and you keep doing it, and all of a sudden you can squat one plate 15 times, it's not as hard anymore. Right.
Yeah.
So after a while, it becomes easy to see, when you're in the midst of difficulty, that it's an opportunity. But it doesn't just happen by like having this epiphany right now. You have to practice it day in and day out. In the morning, you got to like notice your wins from the day before, and plan the wins you're going to have that day. In the evening, categorize them again. Create habits of that attitude of gratitude stuff really does help you focus on the perspective of growing from obstacles or difficulties or trials. Right?
Yeah, absolutely. So when people buy the book and read the book, what are they going to, I mean, you're going to take them on a wild ride, right? You're going to tell them stories, but you're also going to teach lessons, right? That's what throughout this book.
So I wrote it in the way, I really wanted it to apply to not just military, as far as the lessons learned go, and be entertaining read for pretty much anybody. But I don't want to get overly didactic in the book itself. So the book, if you're just looking to read a military story and be entertained, you will. There's a lot of crazy, intense stories, and if you're looking for personal growth and you're looking for it, you'll see it, you'll feel it. Like I said, I don't get overly didactic. I do kind of hit on a little bit of the lessons at the end of each chapter, but it's insidious. I'm sneaking them in there, right? And then at the very end of the book, in the epilogue, we really kind of talk about the science behind some of the things that I was trying to just kind of hint along the way. And then there's a website that we go into it further. And then, like I said, we have the transformation training, where where it's trauma to triumph, right? We're taking trauma and turning it into triumph. We're taking that lightning bolt and lighting up a city. That's what we're doing, right?
This is so good and so important. And there's so many guys out there that are, and women that are stuck, and I think that they've faced some trauma, whether they're veterans and faced a trauma, in the military experience, or they face trauma in their life at some point. And you're right, it's an anchor holding them back. And I think that, this book is a great way to start thinking about things differently. I liked your analogy, the infinite versus the finite. There's a deadly battle, there's violence happening right here, but you look up and there's the mountains, and there's the curvature of the earth, and there's something that's beautiful. And so we sometimes our focus is in the wrong place, and we got to lift our eyes up a little bit and look in a different direction if we're going to want to get through some of this stuff, and so it's not holding us back. So I'm really, Brian, I really appreciate you coming on the show. The book is called Cleared Hot. How can people find out more about you, the book, and some of the training that you offer?
Yeah, so we have clearedhot.info is the website. So it's .info, not .com. the website does have we actually recently, for some reason, all the links got jacked up, but we're fixing that. Don't worry, we'll get it fixed. And then I don't even know how, I'm not the nerd. I don't know how to do all that stuff. But I got the right nerds working on it. And then the world and nerds are what make the world go around. I'm not saying that derogatory.
I'm a nerd, so that's fine.
So I embrace, and I actually covet the abilities. I don't have them myself. Right. So we're working on that. But obviously the book's available on Amazon and on the website, but you'll get it faster through Amazon. And the audiobook should be out by the time you air this, I'm hoping, or pretty close after. And I read it. Let me tell you,
yeah,
that's harder than you think.
Oh, no. It's so hard that I've not read my own books because it is a process, and it is, I don't have the patience for it. So I have voice actors doing all my books. So
it took me 16 tries.
Yeah, no, I'm not surprised. I am not surprised. The more I looked at it as being an entrepreneur and running a business, and I'm actually working on my doctorate right now, I have no time to be reading a book in a studio. So no, I had someone. So my hat's off to you. I respect you. I think authors should read their books. I did not read my books.
So yeah, mad respect to the guys that do that for a living and do it well, yes, because it is a gift.
Yeah, it is very difficult. And the talent of the people that read my books is off the charts, and I don't have that. So
yeah, well, I worked on it and got it to a point where I was like, I'm okay with that. Not like I'm elated with it, but I'm okay with it. So it should be coming out. It's all done. It's going through the final, like they have to approve the quality and all that kind of thing.
Yep.
So and then I'll give you links that you can add on here for all the socials. People can hit me up on the socials. And direct message me on the socials and LinkedIn, Facebook, whatever, if you want to know more about that training. If you feel somebody you know or love that has had a traumatic experience and it can't get past it, this is what we do. Like, we take these people and unstuck them. That's a word. I just made it up. Unstuck them.
Perfect. Well, we're going to go ahead and put links in the show notes for all these resources. Brian, thanks for being on the show. Thanks for sharing your story. Thanks for what you did for the country. And thanks for coming back and wanting to help people through getting through trauma and the things that are getting them stuck in their lives. So I appreciate you coming on the show and sharing all of this.
I appreciate you having me. Don't give up the ship.
Don't give up the ship. Absolutely. Well, that's it for today. Thank you for listening to Deep Leadership. If you like this podcast, please subscribe and share so we can continue to build a world with better bosses. Until next time, this is John Rennie saying take care and lead well.